Hi, my name is Karen Ellis and I'm from Encinitas, California. I'm here to reveal what's going on in the family court corruption. My story begins with meeting my ex-husband. I met him through a Christian dating service. This is a man who claimed to be a virgin at the time I met him, and I believe he was around 29 at the time. I had a store in Pasadena, California, and I was very busy during the time I had the store and really had no life at the time, no dating life. So after I was getting ready to move on from my store, I joined a dating service. I actually started working there. My ex-husband, Rod Bradley, came in and had said that he was dating someone, and but if it didn't work out, would I be interested in going out with him? And I told him no. And that I would be his friend though. And one thing led to another, and that friendship kind of got manipulated into a relationship. And we quickly ended up moving to Denver, Colorado, because he had lost his job and wanted to go to Colorado to see if the job market was better there. We got there. He sat on his computer. I went and got a job, and basically I had the income for quite a while he was claiming to try and find a job. Then we ended up progressing in a relationship. Things were odd always with this man from the time I began seeing him. One of the first events that happened was that his roommate stole all his money, and he was getting kicked out of his apartment because he had been paying this roommate all the money to give to the apartments, and he wasn't giving it to them. There were many things going on, but anyway, so we progressed in a relationship. We stayed with a friend of mine in Colorado, and we eventually got married. Quickly after, and we actually got married because he, in the Christian religion, believed that it was wrong for us to live together, but we financially had to live together. So he convinced me to elope with him. It was a very strange ceremony with these two odd-looking, a female pastor and a male pastor up in the mountains of Colorado. And the whole thing felt a little strange from the very beginning, but I was trying to do the right thing, which is basically who I am and always have been. So we ended up getting married, and he said, so then once we were married, the relationship got even stranger, and he would not sleep in a bed with me. He would often fall asleep on the couch. He would stay up all night playing video games until 3 in the morning. It was just not what I had anticipated for a normal relationship. He would go out and with his friends and stay out long hours. He wrecked my car and didn't tell me about it. Or obviously I knew my car was totaled, but he didn't tell me it was his fault. He actually told me it was the other person's fault. Well, we ended up only having one car, which was his car. And he was supposed to come back so that I could have a car to go do things, and he wouldn't. He would leave me locked in the apartment, which was kind of in the middle of nowhere, all day. Then one time we were traveling. I was 3 months pregnant, at the time, and we were traveling up to go whitewater rafting. And my husband at the time got pulled over by a cop for speeding, and actually ended up getting pulled in because there was a warrant out for his arrest because he had not gone into court for totaling these two cars. Prior to the pregnancy, I had miscarried twins. I had one that actually survived the initial miscarriage, and I was put on bed rest. Then the second baby lived for another 3 months, and then that one I also miscarried. I had to go in for a D&C. When I came home from the D&C, my husband at the time, I laid down and I was completely drugged. It was outpatient surgery, and he told me that I looked really sexy laying there, almost passed out. And he said he wanted to have sex. I had just had a D&C. I said no, and I was shaking my head in kind of a drug euphoria, and he proceeded to rape me. And I remember crying while he was doing this and telling him, no, 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 I've just had a D&C. He got up. I don't even remember what he said, but he just got up and left. And I got up out of bed, totally drugged, went to the bathroom and cleaned up the blood that was all over, running down my legs. This is just kind of a background on this person. This man also admitted later, when we went back to his hometown, one of his friends was recalling him back then in high school and brought up a story of when this man, Rod Bradley, had been gotten in trouble in high school for selling pornography to the other high school students. These are all things that have been stated in the family court system. Time went on. I had my son, and I had my daughter. Rod got a job with IBM, and the company we were working at together was bought out, and so we were let go from our positions, and he got a job with IBM working as a consultant, which meant that he was away most of the time. But it was an income that made it so that it basically doubled his income, and I was able to, take care of my newborn son. Strange things started happening with my son as far back as I can remember. But I really, you don't believe that the person you're married can be so evil, is the best word for it. So you try and make sense of things. And one time, actually, while I was pregnant with my son, I remember being asleep, and I was on my side, and taking a nap because I was 3 months pregnant, and I heard something, and I opened my eyes, and I saw my husband with our dog pinned down to the ground. And he had her head with his arm on her like this. And he had this other hand around, and it appeared that he was sticking his finger inside one of her holes. I looked at him, and I couldn't believe what I was seeing, and I said, "What are you doing?" And he looked up at me and immediately jumped up and acted and said, "You're crazy. I don't know what you're talking about." And I said, and then I saw him do this again to the dog. But I walked in on him doing it. He was actually in the doorway to our backyard doing the same thing to her. And when he would look up at me from this sudden, like, bizarre situation, and I would ask him what he was doing, he has this look on his face like he's in a trance. I didn't really grasp and understand, but and he would always convince me that I was, it was me, and I was paranoid and I was crazy, and, I wasn't seeing what I was seeing. And I guess at that time I chose to believe these stories, even though this man had been lying to me about the smallest things from the time I met him. So we move forward from that, and I have my daughter. My daughter is born, and we move to Oceanside, California, because he's working in Burbank, and we wanted to live in San Diego. And so he's traveling back and forth. He'd go stay up there for a week and then come home and be with me and the children. And things were happening, but I can't emphasize enough that it is so strange when you're seeing these things happen. You cannot believe that someone that you love is so strange and doing such bizarre things. It's hard to believe. And they're the father of your children, and you so desperately want to believe that this isn't possible. That you want to go on with life. And then my son started talking very young. He was around 2.5. The first thing that he said, or what that happened, that really kind of drew me into reality, was we were at Costco, and it was me, my son, and actually, and my daughter, and she was an infant. And my ex-husband picked up my son, and he was holding him and walking around Costco, and my son was licking him in the ear and nibbling on his earlobe. And I looked over at my husband at the time, and I said, wow, what does he do? He's never done that to me. And Rod was giggling about my son licking him in the ear and nibbling on his earlobe. He got furious with me, and he took my son and he pushed him down into the cart abruptly and walked off. And I asked my son why he was doing that, and he goes, "'Cause Daddy likes me to do that." And I said, "Well, why?" And he was very young, and he just was kind of giggling, and he goes, "Yeah, Mommy." I said, "Well, isn't that kind of gross?" And he goes, "Yeah, but it's not as gross as when he sticks his tongue down, ha." And I said, "What?" And he goes, "It's not as gross as when Daddy sticks his tongue down, ha." And when my husband came back, I told him what he had said, and he was very angry, and we left. After that, I was telling stories, reading storybooks to my son, and my son starts disclosing stories left and right about how his father, when he was reading him stories, would stick his finger in my son's poopy, and that he enjoyed having my son eat it. And he enjoyed my son to eat his poop. And he enjoyed eating my son's poop. When I started hearing these things verbally from my son, reality started coming down quickly, and I called a hotline, and the woman on the other end said, I'm not one of the workers, but you need to start journaling every single thing your son says to you. And I did. And I have books of the things that I wrote down my son was saying to me. Some of the worst things are when my son was telling me that his father was sticking pins in him. And he said he would do it in the bathtub. And that it hurt so badly. And that he said his father held him under the water until he thought he was going to die. And then suddenly he would pull him back up out of the water. And this is when my son was 2.5 and 3. And he said, "Mommy," the look on his face, he was smiling. Then there was the time my son would have horrible nightmares. And he would be screaming in the middle of the night. And I went to doctors and they told me he's having night terrors. And then he would tell me what he was having night terrors about, which was about the sexual abuse. And there was one night, the one thing my husband would do that was, I thought, kind at the time through our marriage, especially when we got to Oceanside, was that he would bring me a glass of water every night before I went to bed, because I would get very thirsty during the night. And I understand that some of the things I'm saying here are very difficult for people to believe. So he would bring me a glass of water. I was waking up in the morning and my wrists were so sore. I was going to the doctor thinking I had carpal tunnel. I was going to the drugstore with my husband and getting wrist brace because my wrist was so sore. The doctor told me I couldn't possibly have carpal tunnel because that didn't come and go so quickly. I was waking in the morning and I would have a bloody anus. I thought, do I have cancer? What is going on? I went and had tests. I would wake up and I'd have vertigo. And I had all these things happening. And then my children, and these are not all in line, but then my children started telling me that I asked them if he had ever taken photos of us. And the children said yes, that he had taken photos of me and my kids naked together And I said, well, Mommy doesn't remember that. Where did Daddy do that? And my son pointed to our bedroom. And I said, but Mommy doesn't remember the photos being taken. And he goes, well, Mommy, that's because you were asleep when Daddy was taking the pictures. And you were naked, and he would have us get naked and lay down beside you and take the pictures. And they told me of one time that a big black man came to the house with Daddy. And I didn't remember that either. I started getting feelings that I shouldn't drink the water at night. So one night I didn't. And I heard my son screaming. Actually, I'm sorry, I did drink the water that night, and I heard my son screaming. But I was laid like this, and I couldn't move my arm, and I couldn't move my leg. I couldn't move my head. And my son was screaming so loudly. And I couldn't do anything about it. And I tried as hard as I could. And the next thing I remember, it's like I think I just passed out again and just woke in the morning, and I couldn't figure out what was going on with me. But then another time I got this feeling like I should not be drinking the water. And so I didn't drink the water that night. And then I heard my son screaming again from a night terror. And I watched my husband get up out of bed. And he went into my son's room. And for some reason, I just felt, don't move. Don't get up right now. And it was really odd to see my husband get up and do anything, because he never helped take care of my children when they were babies, and I had to do everything. And I watched him, and he went in and he got my son and he took him out of the bedroom, and I watched him walk downstairs, and he was completely naked because we slept in our bed naked. And he took my son downstairs, and I just watched, and I was thinking initially, wow, that's nice. And then I thought, well, why is he taking him downstairs? And then I waited a couple minutes, and then I got up and I walked to the mid-level of the stairs, and I looked down, and he was laid out on the couch, much like this couch, actually very similar color. He was laid out, and he had my very young son with his diaper off on over his groin, and he was bouncing him like this. And I looked down, and as I looked down, my son turned and looked back at me, and the look in his face was, "Help me, Mommy." And so I said, "Rod, what are you doing?" And he leaped up off the couch, threw my son down on the couch, and said, "Xander had a wet diaper." And I said, well, and I said, well, why didn't you just change the diaper and put him back to bed? And he said, because I brought him down here to comfort him. And when he leaped up, his penis was not hard. I looked at my son, and I picked up my son, and I took him upstairs, and I put his diaper on it, and I put him to bed. And we went back to bed. And I know that sounds crazy, but he swore up and down. He was just trying to comfort my son. Then later on, more and more things started coming out of my son's mouth, and I was confronting my husband, and if it wasn't true, I expected that he would care, that he would say, let's find out who's doing this to our baby. Someone's doing something. This is a 2.5, 3-year-old saying these horrible things. Who's doing it? Let's find out who's doing it. Let's protect our son. And he didn't. He got angry. He got really, really angry. And there was one time that I started taking my son to a therapist on recommendation of a detective. And my son was disclosing things to the detective, and we started seeing this therapist. My son said to the therapist at Children's Hospital after several sessions that his daddy was sticking his finger in his poopy. The therapist sat in front of me and my son and said, that could be anything. That could be your husband spanking him. And after that session, she said, I'm no longer going to be able to see you anymore. You need to take your son to a behavioral specialist. Well, that day, after my son had disclosed to this therapist, when we went home, he confronted his father, my 3-year-old son, who is my hero. He went to his father and he stood on the couch and he said, and his father was in the kitchen, and he said to his father, he said, you stick your finger in my poopy. And Rod got furious, started yelling at my son, saying, why are you saying these things about me? You know these things are lies, screaming at my 3-year-old son. My 3-year-old son said again, you stick your finger in my poopy. And I was standing at the edge of the couch. And Rod got angrier, and he got mad at me, and then my son said it again. He's so brave. And then after he said it the 3rd time, I remember him falling into the cushions and saying, Mommy, I'm done now. After that, my husband came to me and said he was going to prove that he was innocent. He was going to take a lie detector test, that he had found the person, and he was going to pay for it. And so we ended up doing that, and we had a Bible study behind us. My ex-husband had walked into the Bible study and told them that I needed prayer, I needed prayer, because he was scared that I was possessed, because I kept claiming that my children were telling me that he was sexually abusing them, and that the Bible study needed to pray for me, and that he was going to go take a lie detector test, and the Bible study said they would stand behind us no matter what the result, that they would take that as the Word of God. Whatever the result of this test came out, that they were going to believe it was the Word of God and it was the truth. We went down, he took the lie detector test. He was asked questions like, did you stick your finger in your son's poopy like your son said he did? He said no, and it showed that he failed every single question he was asked. When the lie detector guy came out and told me the results, I was there with my children, hoping that we were going to have a resolve to this, that we were going to be able to go on, find out who was doing this to my son. Instead, I got the bad news. He said, your husband needs to go see Dr. Clipson. He needs to get evaluated further. I picked up my children I got in my car and I drove home and I changed the locks on the door, and that was it. I knew it was the truth. Rod was picked up by someone from the Bible study, and he called, begging me to believe him that it was the drugs, he was some ADHD drug had skewed the results or whatever. And I was done then. So then he came that night, and really late, like 2 a.m, and he couldn't get in the house. And he started ringing the doorbell over and over. And I went and I unplugged the doorbell because it was waking my children. I was so scared. And he was pounding and yelling at me from outside, and I wouldn't let him in. Then the next day when we woke up, I was feeding my children breakfast in the kitchen dining area, and it was hot, and we didn't have the air conditioning on, so I had the window open, and he came around, got into the backyard, and he came around, and he started yelling at me through the screen, and then he punched in the screen and crawled in the window just next to my daughter, who was in her high chair eating. I grabbed the phone, I picked up the phone, I dialed 911, and as the lady came onto the phone, he walked up to me and he had his fist up and he was about to pound me in the face. And I panickedly said to the 911 operator, I said, he's going to hit me in the face. And she said, and she started, I don't know what she said. Somehow I gave her the information, and he withdrew his fist and ran into the study and grabbed his computer, his laptop, the only thing he took from the house, got in his car and took off back up to Burbank. The police arrived. I told them what had happened. They were acting like I was hysterical. The report said that I was hysterical. That I was acting irrationally. My husband had almost pounded me in the face. And then my kids started disclosing to the police. I said, he just left in the car. They wouldn't go after him. They said, he's gone. He's long gone. I told them where he was, and they wouldn't go. They said that's a different district. Then about a week later, CPS came out. My children disclosed, my son. My daughter was too little, but she had said things similar to not exactly, but kind of like what my son had been saying, and in her best little baby way. And my son disclosed to the CPS officer. She believed my son. She came to me and said, I know this is happening. She wrote a report. She said, but here's the problem. I've just been retired from my position. She said, you're going to have to deal with my manager, my superior officer. I forget what she said. I remember thinking, that's odd, you're so young to be retired. And she goes, that's what they're calling it. Well, when I got the report back, you could physically see that she had checked that this was happening and that my children should be in my care completely, 100%. That had been whited out, and a check below it had been checked in. All these things started happening. We started seeing therapists and detectives, and I was told by the detective that my son was too young and that his testimony could never put my husband in jail for what he was doing, and that I needed to go into civil court. And I thought that meant that, and she told me about the loophole at the time in the law, and she told me that I needed to go into civil court. Well, I thought that meant go get a divorce. So I went and filed for divorce, and all these things were entered into the court. The lie detector test, Clipson's test, which I finally saw. On Clipson's test, it showed that my husband at the time had admitted in this test to having sex with dogs, to having sex with men, to having sex with hookers, to having sex on planes, in the seat, masturbating in the seat, masturbating in public, having sex with, plastic blow-up dolls. He admitted to me that he had molested his niece when she's 6 months old and he was 12 years old. He admitted that in court. Of course, the age changed. The judges said that this was just experimentation. All the expert, they were saying that he wasn't molesting this 6-month-old by sticking his finger inside of her. He was just experimenting, and it was normal. I gave them all my notes that I had typed out from everything that my son had told me, which came down to, he said his father had stuck his penis in his poopy, and many, many horrible things. And the sticking the pins in, my daughter had said Daddy stuck pins inside of her, in her holes down there. And I had taken my son to the doctor, and the doctor said no, but his penis was red where the hole was. I took my son down to Children's Hospital. They said, that they weren't sure, but it seemed like something wasn't right. Just so many things happened. I took my daughter to Children's Hospital at one point, and I never really did hear the results of that until then we started seeing. We were told by the court that I got full custody of my children, and the father got monitored visits. We started seeing we had to go see a 7:30 expert, court ordered. We had to see a therapist that was court ordered. We could not choose our own therapist. This therapist was not covered by insurance, so we were paying $250 an hour for her. The monitor that my husband was given was $250 an hour. He had 6 hours or more a week of visits. We had sold our house, made a nice profit on the house, which every penny has gone to these experts, these monitors, these therapists, these lawyers. $250,000 completely gone. I've spent over $100,000 of my own money. My parents have spent $100,000. I mean, the money that has been spent just going through the court system, and we are not rich people, is extravagant, unheard of, unbelievable. But it was our children. It was my children. I knew that my children were telling the truth. I knew that this had happened. They reported to lawyers. They disclosed to therapists, to monitors. All these people. I had, and yet, I would be told I was believed. My children were believed. And then suddenly we'd get into court, and the judge would stand up there saying it's unsubstantiated. Information would change, We went and we started seeing Dr. Doyne. I got evaluated. I had the personality test. My kids talked to him. The father was evaluated. Dr. Doyne told me at one point, I said, I don't know. Is he multiple personalities? And Dr. Doyne said to me, I know for a fact your husband knows exactly what he's doing. Dr. Doyne asked me at one point, does your husband do drugs? And I said, no, he's claims to be a Christian. I never did drugs. I had no experience with people that did drugs. I couldn't tell you what it looked like if someone was on drugs, maybe if they had smoked pot, but I would just think they were drunk. We went through all of this. Dr. Doyne then actually came into court and said that he believed that I should have full custody of my children, that Rod Bradley should never be left alone with any child unmonitored, and that I should be allowed to move to Florida where my family was so I could have a support system. The judge turned to Dr. Doyne, Judge Dahlquist, several times and said, "Are you sure about the testimony you're giving?" And looked Dr. Doyne right in the eye. And Dr. Doyne turned, he looked down, and he said, "Yes." And the judge did not like it. And then my husband's lawyer stood up and said, Dr. Doyne is prejudiced against my client. We want another 730 expert on this. And the judge said, "It's granted." And he said, but Dr. Doyne's report would be the primary report, and that Dr. Sparta, who is now being put on this, would just be to add to Dr. Doyne's report, which was things like not talking to my husband's therapist, who was not a therapist. He was a man who was a sexual deviant and had gone through some Christian program to be deprogrammed from being a sexual deviant, and now was, the head of the program and was going to take care of my husband and help him to get over these deviant behaviors. Dr. Doyne did say and that my husband was a sexual deviant. And that he shouldn't be left alone with any child unmonitored. We then started seeing Dr. Sparta. Dr. Sparta came after me, honestly. I mean, his report was pretty much a report on me as a mother. But interesting enough, even though he was really coming after me, he stated in his report that it was found at Children's Hospital, which I had not even realized, that my daughter had cuts to her vagina that were in line with looking like she had been cut with a knife. And this was reported in the court in front of the judge. This report was submitted to court and had that in it. Needless to say, I had my children for 4 years through this ongoing evaluation, and these therapists and these monitors and all this money that was being spent, and these lawyers, and my husband had monitored visits, and we and then suddenly I think the money from the house ran out. I don't have proof in front of me of that, but then suddenly Judge Dahlquist decided that Rod Bradley no longer needed monitored visits with a paid monitor, and that he could, the monitors had actually come in, his monitors, and thrashed me in court, saying that I was a horrible mother, and that the way I was acting with my children when I'd pick them up from these visits were horrible. There was one time where my daughter ran off the playground to my car and refused to get out of the car, and said that Daddy was touching her privates when he was going down the slide with her between his legs. She refused to get out of the car. I went and told Dr. Woodburn, and he started yelling at me, saying he had been watching it and that this had not happened, and that I was to force my daughter to get out of the car. So I went back and I told my daughter, "Honey, I'm sorry, but you have to go back out." And she unwillingly did. Then Ginty Reeves just thrashed me, and she was looked like she was being romanced by Rod Bradley, a single mother from Africa, South Africa, trying to get her degree as a therapist here, her license here. So they went up against me completely in court. The family mediator initially had given reports stating that I should have custody of my children, 99%. Well, over time that changed too, and everything I said in those meetings, basically he didn't report, or he said something that I hadn't said. And these were the reports then being given to the judge. The judge then said that Rod Bradley should have basically evolved it into that he should have unmonitored overnight visits. The first weekend my children went to him for the overnight visit, my daughter came back that Monday night. I was reading her a story and she was in the tub. And I'm reading and I look up and my daughter had stuck her finger all the way up her anus, pulled it out and goes like this. And I looked at her and I said, McKenna, why are you doing that? And she said, because Daddy likes me to do that when he's reading a story to me and I'm in the bathtub. And I said, honey, do you know that's wrong? And she said, no, Mommy, Daddy tells me one thing and you tell me another, so I don't know. And I said, is there anything else Daddy does? And she said, he stands in the doorway and he plays with his, I forgot what she called it, his something, and tells me to play with myself while he's doing that. And she said, Mommy, and it's really weird or whatever she said. And she said, he goes, McKenna, do what Daddy wants or Daddy's gonna kill you. McKenna, do what Daddy wants or Daddy's gonna spank you. McKenna, do what Daddy wants or Daddy's gonna take your blankie. And she said, he says it so nicely, Mommy. And I said, McKenna, do you tell his wife what's happening? And she said, yes. One time I came out of the tub and I told her and she got really mad and she pushed me on the floor and started kicking me and screaming at me and saying, never say that again. And that is not true about your father. And that's horrible that you're saying those things about your father. Well, she came back after that first weekend and I reported to CPS. The First Lady did not like what she was hearing me say. Then there was another lady put on it and she talked to my children. She said she completely believed my children and that if I was to hand my children over to their father, that I would be helping to have these children abused. And she said if she had to, she was going to put these children in the care of the court so that they did not go back. We go into court, she says this to the judge says, I need these children to be evaluated by a detective. We go to a detective up in Orange County, which was where they live. The detective listens to my children. He comes out, this large man, and starts very angrily telling me that, you know, your children, he said, your daughter, when she was asked, pointed to the front and to the back, and she obviously doesn't know what she's talking about, if her father's sticking her finger in her. You know, she's pointing the front and the back. She's so confused. And he said, and your son talks about all these things, and, you know, it sounds like he doesn't know what he's talking about too, and it sounds like he's been coached. And I said, you know, I just didn't know what to say. And then that information was given to the judge, and the judge didn't like it, but continued with, you know, and then the next thing I was given to Judge Brannigan, or this happened with Judge Brannigan, and then it did. I'm sorry. So Judge Brannigan was new on the case, and we went in, and this was all being done in front of Judge Brannigan at this point. And then after all this happened with the detective, I went back into court, and then Judge Brannigan said to me, you are losing legal and physical custody of your children, and because you refuse to stop reporting abuse. And he said, you are never allowed to report abuse on any child ever again. And my children, I was told that I was to hand my children from the court to the father right there that they were not allowed to go back to the house. They were not allowed to say goodbye to their friends. They were not allowed to get any of their belongings. My children came out of childcare at the court, ran around the court, refused to go with their father, screaming, crying. The court guard came out. He looked at me. He said, "I am so sorry for what the judge did to you and your children. You need to appeal immediately." He said, "I'm going to go ask the judge if he will allow you to take your children home and then meet the father at a location later." So we were able to go home. My children were able to get their blankies, a couple of their belongings. My son was crying hysterically, and I tried to comfort him. And he said, "Mommy, I'm going to kill him someday." And I said, "You know what, Xander? Your best revenge is success." And then he said to me, "Mommy, if God loves me, why is he allowing these things to happen to me?" And I said, "Honey, I don't know." I had thought that many times. And then I take my kids over to the location, and there are policemen there because the father had called police because he thought I was going to do something. I get out of the car. My daughter gets out of the car. My son gets back in the car. I had taken my keys, or I had left my keys in the car, and he locked the doors and refused to get out. They told me to go talk to him, and I tried, and he refused. And the police said that they went over and said that they would listen to my son, and he disclosed again. And the police officer came over and said, "We believe your son, and because the court order says you have lost legal and physical custody, I cannot hand them back over to you. So we're taking them to the Polinsky Center." My kids were in the Polinsky Center for 3 days. And then their father had gone to the judge and was allowed to come pick them up. I've had monitored visits ever since. That was 3 years ago. My daughter started coming to the visits. One of the beginning visits I remember was that she was crying because we were in a movie, and she started crying because of the pain of the burning in her privates. And it hurt so bad, the burning, that we had to leave the movie with the monitor and go to a drugstore, but I couldn't get her anything to help because my legal custody had been taken away. So the monitor called the father and said, "We need to get something to help your daughter." So he actually came and picked them up, and the visit ended early. 2 weeks after that, my daughter came to the visit with a huge burn across her forehead that she said the stepmother and her sister had given her while trying to get her ready for Halloween. And anyone knows that if you touch a curling iron to your head, it's excruciatingly painful. And my daughter started crying while she was telling me. This is 2 weeks after the fact, and I have a photo of the scab and scar on her forehead. She starts bawling. She said, "Mommy, it hurts so bad." And I had to take and hand my children back to the people that had done this to her. My children would come to almost every visit with some kind of injury. From this monitor, the initial monitor that I had, told me at one point, months in, that I was an awesome mother and that I should subpoena him into court because I was such a great mother, that I should be allowed to see my children every day, and that he was going to testify to that. Then Christmas came. I noticed in my rear view mirror a big smile on this large award-winning weightlifter's face as he was handed an envelope from Rod Bradley. We went to the Quail Gardens because that's what we had done every Christmas, and my children loved to do that. We went and did the Christmas crafts, then we were walking down to roast marshmallows, and I had a certain amount of time for these visits, and I knew how long the visits were. We weren't far from the location of where we dropped them off. We were walking down to roast marshmallows, and the large male monitor starts screaming at me, "Get in the car now." I said, "My children love to roast marshmallows. This is their thing." He starts screaming, "Get in the car now." He was screaming so loudly that I had people walking up to me asking me if I wanted them to call the police. And I said no, because I was terrified that I would be reported, that I would be seen as crazy, but that the monitor would start saying things to the police that I was doing something wrong. The monitor's screaming that he's calling the father, screaming that I'm kidnapping my children. We're walking through the Quail Gardens, walking, and this huge man is screaming, "I'm kidnapping my children." I decided at that point my children were going to have the Christmas that we had always had together. We walked down, we roasted marshmallows. He's screaming the whole time. The volunteers there are asking me if I should call the police, and I was just shaking no, like trying to be passive and non-threatening and non-aggressive, and this monitor is like abusing us verbally and yelling at us, and I'm remaining calm, and we get done roasting marshmallows. He's screaming the whole time, and we walk back to the car. We get in the car, and I know what's happening because I've been hearing from these other women. And I start telling my kids as we're driving back, "Mommy loves you. No matter what anyone says, remember, Mommy always loves you." And I drop them off. We're 10 minutes early. I'm told by the monitor that I am never allowed to go outside with my children again, that I need to be in a lockdown facility because I'm a kidnapping danger to my children. He said he would not monitor these visits anymore. And he said I needed to leave immediately. Mind you, we were early to the drop-off location. I decided to wait. The father came 15 minutes to half an hour late. He picked up my children. I ended up not seeing my children for about 5 months after that because I was being told by the monitor, the father, that I had to be in a lockdown facility. And I was saying the court order does not state this. Well, basically, if I was going to see my children, I had to go to a lockdown facility, which I did, Casa de Amparo. I spent time in this lockdown facility for over a year with my children coming to these visits. My son having twisted fingers. One time they both came with fat upper lips out to here, bloody across the top, to the visit in front of the monitor. My daughter said she got her fat upper lip from falling down the stairs. My son got his fat upper lip from being hit in the face with a soccer ball the day before. Then later on, my daughter, I get a call from the monitor, and she tells me that I'm not going to be able to have my visit that week because my daughter has been in the hospital with a fractured skull. I had never been told. I was never allowed to come visit my daughter in the hospital for the time she was in there. And it was reported that she had been on her scooter going down a large hill and had fallen off and hit her head on the side and was found by their 3-year-old neighbor laying on the side of the road. When I finally was able to see my daughter and son 2 weeks after the fact, because the therapist had said that I was too much of a stress to my daughter for her to see me after her fractured skull. That I asked my daughter, I said, honey, what's the last thing you remember before going to the hospital? She said to me in front of the monitor, I remember hitting Gretchen with my fists, that's her stepmother, and saying, I want my mommy. But the story goes that she was going on a scooter. Either way, I was not allowed to see my children, my injured daughter. If my daughter had been killed, would I have been told? Then my son came with a broken wrist. And now, I finally got back into court and was able to get, say, that I could have visits outside, but I have no money. I'm struggling financially. I came into this marriage with over $100,000 in the bank, in savings, an IRA, money in the bank from selling the things in my store. Rod Bradley came into this marriage with over $150,000 in debt, which he tacked on to the sale of our house, which I was told that I had to pay half of that debt, even though it showed clearly that he had gained all this debt prior to the marriage, that I was to split my IRA with him, because he had never had an IRA. I was actually fined in court by Judge Brannigan $70,000 to be given to the father for slander. That's not even legal in divorce court. I was told I was fined $5,000 in slander to pay to Rod Bradley's lawyer. I was not working. I was a stay-at-home mom. I was told I was to pay them, my ex-husband and his wife, child support. And he said, we're going to allocate that you could be making $30,000. So now that's added up. I couldn't get a job. I hadn't worked in 10 years. So I finally started my own business, which has been a struggle to make money. But I'm doing it. I'm getting there. I'm completely broke in poverty, and the only way that I've been able to live at this point is by the generosity of my parents and friends. I should have gone on welfare, and I was told to do that by a mother 8 years ago, and I never did that. I always thought, I can do this. I can make a living again. I can pay the child support. I can pay the debt. I recently went back in. I now have Judge Pollock as my judge. I still have monitored visits with no end in sight. I've never been completely told why I have monitored visits. Drug addicts get 3 months of monitored visits and are given their children back. Mothers who report abuse, there's no end date in sight. And we have to pay. Drug addicts get it for free at Casa de Amparo. I went into court with Judge Pollock and I said, I want a statement of disclosure as to why I have monitored visits with my children, why I lost legal and physical custody of my children. And he said, he just kind of stumbled through things and said, whatever that other judge had said, that's why. I said, he's told me over and over, the only way I can get unmonitored visits is I go get a psych eval, that he's certain, and he says this in court in front of everybody, I know you're crazy, but I need proof. You have to go get a psych eval. I'm like, I have no money. He said, you better figure it out because that's the only way you're gonna get unmonitored visits. I can't even afford to see my children at this point. I get Skype visits for 15 to 30 minutes a week. The last time I saw my children was I splurged so I could, for my daughter's birthday, and the father didn't even bring her. He just brought my son, claiming my daughter was sick. The next week was Mother's Day. Both my kids showed up. We got to celebrate Mother's Day and my daughter's birthday, and that's the last I've seen my kids in person because I just can't afford it. $400 a month for me to see my children, $300 in child support, $700 going to a man who's making $150,000 at IBM a year or more. In the hearing this last time with Judge Pollock, who you've heard of in the national news because Crystal Harris is the one who Judge Pollock demanded that she pay alimony to her ex-husband, which she caught on video raping her, and he's now in jail. So Crystal has gone over all, on many different TV shows. This is the same judge. And he's also told her that she will be paying, that her children will be given 50% custody to this ex-husband who's in jail right now once he gets out of jail. This is the man who's now my judge, telling me I'm crazy, coming into court saying that I, reading something that I had written in response to a post by Damon, who's running from his sexually abusive father. Saying it in court, I mean, obviously he's embroiled in this case to be researching me outside of court. I don't even think that's legal. He tells me, I said, I don't need a psych eval. I have an evaluation. Nothing is wrong with me. Dr. Doyne's report, Dr. Sparta's report. The father then stands up and said, Dr. Doyne's report has been thrown out of court, which is a blatant lie. I said, that is not true. The judge says, be quiet, shut up. Then I said, he tells me that, I'm lying and that I'm in contempt of court and that I, can be thrown in jail for 4 years for this. And I point to him and I said, he just lied. And the judge said, oh, he wasn't lying. He said he was just using that as a phrase, I'm going to be, it's been thrown out of court. And the list of things goes on. But I know that's a lot of information, and I appreciate that Bill is listening to all these women and that he understands that my children have not seen their grandparents in 3 years now. And when I heard Patricia Barry speaking the other day up in Los Angeles, I was so relieved to see that there's one person, a lawyer, who, is telling the truth. Everything she said has been my experience. These judges have no consequences for their actions. You cannot sue a judge. You cannot put them in jail. You cannot throw them off the seat. There are babies dying, children being sexually abused. This is human trafficking going on in family court. It needs to stop. Thank you so much for listening. Told me that they said that Stanwood Johnson, who was my ex's lawyer, did have a relationship with one of the judges, and actually that he is the lawyer that they use when they need a per lawyer, and that he's friendly with all the judges, and also that I think he does like fundraising for them or something to this effect. So yes, there's definitely things going on between his lawyer and the judges, and I'm certain that there are things going on between these therapists and the monitors and the family mediator. I mean, it seems like money is being exchanged. It seems like they have a much bigger motivation to do what they're doing than what we can see on the surface for sure.